Hey guys, I'm not a luthier. In fact, I'm a rank amateur. But I just recently spent a few weeks fixing up a guitar that I had bought that I was disappointed with, and here's a video of how I did it. Life is full of disappointments. Recently, I bought a new guitar. This one here. It's a Seagull, which is a Canadian brand, handmade in the eastern townships of Quebec. Really good brand. It's a Godin brand, and it was supposed to be a very quality guitar. And when I got it back here, it had severe intonation problems, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute. Okay, let's talk about intonation. Intonation on a guitar means that whatever you tune the string at, when you go to the 12th fret, it should be exactly one octave higher. On this guitar, the E string has very severe intonation problems, and let me show you. When I hit the deep E, so that's pretty close, that's good, that's the E. When I push my finger on the 12th fret, look at that. It's bouncing between very high E or F. Here's what I think the problem is. I don't think the nut is fitted properly. The nut is actually tilted inward a little bit. The E string is actually making contact further back on the nut instead of right up at the front, which is where you want the string to make contact. And that's making this side of the string to the 12th fret longer than this side. So that's the problem with the Seagull. And fortunately, I believe it's just the nut. So I've ordered a new nut for that. That won't come here until after Christmas. Because the height of these strings is so high, I'm going to have to shave the saddle a little bit so that I can shave the bridge so I can shave the saddle to adjust the string height down. To get it so that it's the proper distance above the frets. You don't want it to be too low, or you get buzzed while you play, but if it's too high, you stretch the strings too much when you push it down, and you get a dead sound when you play. I've also determined that there is a hump in the neck right here. For this guitar, it's not so bad, and I've had this problem before. I had this problem on my Epiphone, and basically what I did to fix it is I just sanded the hump out. So what I've done is I've pulled all the frets out, and I also have to shave down the neck, because one of the problems is, or the bridge, one of the problems if you do this, instead of ungluing the neck and putting a shim in to tilt it back and straighten it, if you're going to sand the neck down, you're going to end up dropping the point where the strings, you're going to have more of a gap, right? And so in order to lower the action, you have to file down the bridge. And when the saddle, pardon me, I'm really messing up. And when you file down the saddle, you end up getting the saddle too close to the top of the bridge, and you don't get that break angle that I told you about. So this saddle right here, this saddle is almost flush with the bridge. And because someone's already tried to lower the action on it at least once because of the bowing of the neck, So I'm going to shave down the bridge part so that there will be more saddle sticking up, and then I'll be able to drop the saddle a little bit more as well. And I'm sanding on the hump, and I'm just going to be sanding back and forth like this. And you can probably already see that it's starting to sand away exactly where I want it to. Another thing you have to do is when you're doing this, you want to constantly be checking it to make sure that you're not adding a twist to the neck. And so what I usually do is I usually look at the binding in the distance, and I judge based on that. But the goal is going to be to continue lightly sanding until the sanding marks from both sides are evenly matched all along the neck. So what I'm going to do now is I'm moving on to a radius block. This is a 16 16-inch radius, meaning if you were to draw a 16-inch circle, the radius would be the curvature would be 16. You can kind of see the curvature right there. That's the shape that I want my fingerboard to be, because it's just a very common, very, in between shape. And then I'll start going progressively through the grits to make a nice finish on the wood. The sanding of the neck is complete. Anyways, I'm about to apply the tung oil. I've used teak oil as well. In this case, I'm going to use tung oil because after sanding, a lot of the grain popped out. There's a lot of grain visible in the areas that I sanded. And so I'm going to do several layers of tung oil and let it harden. And then scrub it down with a little bit of steel wool to try to get those the grain to blend a little more. I've done this on buttstocks for antique rifles, and it's worked pretty well. But anyways, so there you go. That's the finished product. Nice dark. You can see the seagull still looks pretty good. Next step is going to be shaving the bridge. Shaving is exactly what it is. I have a small hand block, and I just shave down the neck, or the bridge, the bridge. It sort of bumps up and comes down. So as I do this, I also want to make sure that I don't get it like perfectly flat across. The next step before I fret it is I need to fix chips that are right on the fret line, because otherwise when I put the fret in, the edge of the fret is going to be like a razor blade. All right, I've put a barrier of tape along where I want to form the filler, and I have this small bottle of powdered ebony, but I basically just scoop out a little bit of the powder and drop it in to the gap that I want to fill in. And I'm going to be filling in part of the fret cut, and I don't mind that because I can just cut that out. But I press it in a little bit and then scrape it off. For the thin super glue, they make a little tip that you can use to more precisely put the super glue, but I'm just going to go ahead and put a drop on each of the places. As you can see, it looks a little bit ugly. I've adhered a piece of 220 sandpaper, and I am lightly, and I mean lightly, sanding the super glue and ebony powder off. And I'm using a block. You should always use a block for this kind of thing because your fingers are soft and they will sand over bumps and cause divots on the other side of the bump. Now in this case, I want to sand all the way down to the rosewood, all around the part that I filled in. Let's clean that up a little bit, see what we got. Looks pretty good on the top, and I am going to lightly sand along this fingerboard. I always hate doing that because the fingerboard is done with lacquer. If you want it to make it look nice again, you have to use lacquer on it. The only thing I need to do now is recut the fret slot. And you have to be really gentle with this because it's so easy to just grab that whole patch that you just put in there and pull it right out. And the black just kind of blends in with the wood. That one, there's still a little bit of a chip there. However, it's flush enough that it won't cause problem with the fret. My new Graphtec nut has arrived. I thought it wasn't going to arrive until the 30th, but it arrived today. It's the 23rd. The nut was tilted sort of like this. And so with the new nut, I sanded down the back of the new nut so that it perfectly is flush against the fingerboard. I don't have enough frets to completely refret it, but I put one on there because I wanted to check how the intonation's doing. So let's just tune that on a little bit. There we go. That's on, and so I'm going to press the fret down, and the action is super high, so it's going to go sharp. I also need to shave down the saddle to lower the action. That's how you lower the action on an acoustic. And I did a little work here on the holes, but I need to carve some slots for the strings so that works better. But let's go ahead and check the intonation. So I'm just going to push it down and tweak it, and let's see if it's any better than it was before. So, all right, so that's on, right at the fret. Only a little bit sharp. And that can be attributed to probably the action. Okay, I have the frets on, and I've done an initial dressing. The next thing I have to do is I actually have to level all the frets. Even though I've put them on neck that I sanded, and the neck was level, not every fret went in to the slot the same depth. I've wrapped tape in between every fret to protect them, and I've taken a Sharpie and I've drawn a black line across the top of every single fret, like that. So now I've got my sanding block, and I have just a 320 grit on there, and I'm going to just sand a little bit like this. So when you look at what gets sanded, it shows you which frets are high and which are not. Okay, and where they're high and where they're not. Okay, after sanding, I've got pretty good, pretty uniform marking all the way up to the point up here, where, as I told you before, the neck kind of starts to dive down. So I'm going to put this fret rocker on here. And I don't know if you can hear it, but there is just a little bit of a rock, which means that this fret is higher and theoretically could cause buzzing if I'm playing on this fret. This dark mark here in the middle doesn't rock at all. So I'm not worried about this one that's right in the middle. This one over here, I'm a little bit worried about, so I'm going to sand just a little bit more, and then I'll start polishing. Okay, the next and nearly last step to refretting a guitar is to recrown it. I have two tools that I use for that. One, I have a very small safe edge file, and that means that on one of the edges it's perfectly smooth and rounded, and I use that to clean up the ends of the frets. You recall I said after we use that special thing, the edges are quite sharp. So I use that to knock that off. But what I also do is I run it along the side of the fret a few times at about a 45-degree angle, and I do that on both sides. Now I'm going to use a special file. It has a safe edge and diamond edge on the other. Let me see if I can get the light over here. Okay, I don't know if you can see that. And what that does is that basically files one side of the fret. So I put that on here, and I run that back and forth about 20 times. 19, 20. Then I flip it over and I do it again. And then I clear the dust, and what I expect to see, as soon as I find out, where the camera is, what I expect to see is a thin little black line right across the top of the fret. Oh, it's 12:30 at night. The frets are done, polished and dressed. By and large, they're pretty good. The guitar is mechanically complete. I've got the bridge sanded, I've refretted the neck, all the frets have been added, I've got the new nut installed and slotted close to where I want it to go. The remaining work that has to be done is called the setup, the neck setup. And a neck setup has 4 or 5 things that you have to do, and you have to do them in order. The first thing we're going to do is adjust the truss rod so that the relief of the neck is correct. And then the second thing we're going to do, once that is done, is we're going to adjust the nut to make sure that you don't have to push down too far for when you're playing your open chords, otherwise the strings will go sharp. Once that's done, the third thing we're going to check is the shape of the strings. I'm going to make sure that the saddle holds the strings in the same shape as the neck, the radius, which you remember is 16. After that's done, then we will go ahead and adjust the action. And the action is the height of the strings above the frets. And then finally, the last thing we'll do is we'll adjust the intonation. And the intonation, as I explained at the beginning, was the original problem with this guitar. It is finished. The guitar is done.